Picture this. It is the middle of summer. The parking lot is packed. Kids are running around with melting ice cream cones. Parents are sitting in their cars after a long day. And somewhere in the background, that familiar red and white Dairy Queen sign is glowing like a tiny piece of Americana. For decades, Dairy Queen was not just a fast food chain. It was a ritual, a memory, a place people connected with road trips, baseball games, first dates, and childhood summers. But behind those famous blizzards and soft-serve cones is a story filled with risky decisions, huge success, painful decline, and a battle to stay relevant in a world that changes faster every year. Because believe it or not, there was a time when Dairy Queen looked unstoppable, and then suddenly, it looked like it might disappear forever. So how did one small ice cream stand become a billion-dollar empire? And why did everything almost fall apart? The story starts back in the late 1930s, long before fancy frozen drinks and social media food trends existed. America was still climbing out of the Great Depression, money was tight, people wanted affordable treats, and two men named John Fremont McCullough and his son Alex believed they had something special. They had been experimenting with a new kind of soft frozen dairy dessert, smoother and creamier than regular ice cream. And honestly, at the time, it felt revolutionary. Most ice cream back then was hard-packed and difficult to scoop, but this new formula was lighter, softer, and easier to serve quickly. Now here's the interesting part. The first Dairy Queen was not even called Dairy Queen because they wanted to build a giant restaurant empire. At first, it was simply about testing the product. In 1940, they convinced a friend who owned a small ice cream shop in Joliet, Illinois, to sell their soft serve for one day. And what happened next shocked everybody. More than 1,600 servings were sold in just 2 hours. Think about that for a second. During a time when people barely had extra money, customers lined up for soft-serve ice cream like it was the future. That moment changed everything. Suddenly, the McCullough family realized they were not just selling dessert. They were selling an experience. And almost immediately they began franchising the concept, which turned out to be one of the smartest decisions they ever made. Because Dairy Queen spread across America incredibly fast. Small towns loved it. Big cities loved it. Families loved it. Teenagers loved it. It was cheap, simple, and easy to run. By the 1950s, Dairy Queen had become a cultural icon. These little roadside stores were popping up everywhere, especially in rural America where fast food chains had not fully arrived yet. And this is something people forget today. Dairy Queen was not trying to compete with luxury restaurants. It was becoming part of everyday life. After Little League games, families would stop at Dairy Queen. After church, people would stop at Dairy Queen. After school, teenagers would gather there. The company understood something incredibly important. People do not just buy food, they buy feelings. And honestly, Dairy Queen felt magical during that era. The menu was simple but memorable. Cones, sundaes, milkshakes, banana splits. Everything felt fun and comforting. And unlike giant corporate chains that sometimes felt cold, Dairy Queen stores often felt local and personal because many franchise owners were deeply connected to their communities. Then came the real explosion. By the 1960s and 70s, Dairy Queen was everywhere. Thousands of locations opened across North America. The company became one of the fastest growing food chains in the world, and this was the golden age, the kind of success most businesses dream about. Revenue was climbing, brand recognition was massive, and customers were loyal in a way that feels almost impossible today. But things did not stay that way. The first signs of trouble appeared slowly, almost quietly, and at first, most people did not notice. Because while Dairy Queen was growing, the fast food industry itself was changing rapidly. Chains like McDonald's and Burger King were becoming more aggressive. They were standardizing operations, expanding menus, and investing heavily in marketing. Meanwhile, Dairy Queen still relied heavily on its old-fashioned image and independent franchise model. Now that sounds harmless, maybe even charming, but it created a huge problem behind the scenes. Many Dairy Queen locations operated differently from one another. Some served full meals, some focused mainly on dessert, some looked modern, others looked frozen in the 1950s. And while customers loved the nostalgic vibe, inconsistency became dangerous. This is where everything changed. As the 1980s arrived, America was becoming obsessed with speed and convenience. Competition was brutal, and suddenly Dairy Queen no longer looked like the exciting future of food. It looked old-fashioned. And honestly, old-fashioned can either feel charming or outdated, and Dairy Queen was drifting dangerously toward outdated. Then came one of the company's biggest turning points, the Blizzard. In 1985, Dairy Queen introduced the Blizzard, and if you grew up in North America, there is a good chance you know exactly what this is. Thick, soft serve mixed with candy, cookies, brownies, or whatever sweet topping your heart desired. But here is the crazy part. The Blizzard was not just another menu item, it saved the company. The idea was simple but genius. Make the dessert so thick that employees could turn it upside down without it falling out. Suddenly, Dairy Queen had a product people could not stop talking about. Customers were obsessed. Kids begged their parents for it. Teenagers made it part of their routines. And the company sold more than 100 million Blizzards in the first year alone. Think about how rare that is. One product completely changing the direction of an entire business. For a while, Dairy Queen was back on top. The Blizzard became iconic. Commercials were everywhere, and the chain regained cultural relevance. But underneath the success, another problem was growing. The restaurant industry was evolving again. Customers no longer wanted just dessert shops. They wanted full meals, drive-through convenience, healthier options, modern interiors, and better technology. Meanwhile, Dairy Queen found itself trapped between identities. Was it an ice cream shop, a burger chain, or a nostalgic roadside stop? That confusion hurt the brand more than people realized. Some locations adapted well and introduced hot food menus under the Dairy Queen grill and chill concept. Others struggled badly. And because the franchise system was so decentralized, the customer experience remained inconsistent. One Dairy Queen might feel modern and clean, while another looked like it had not changed in 30 years. And then things became even more complicated. In the 1990s and early 2000s, competition exploded. Suddenly, frozen yogurt chains appeared. Coffee shops started selling blended frozen drinks. Premium ice cream brands gained popularity, and fast food chains upgraded their dessert menus. Dairy Queen was no longer competing against a few burger places. It was competing against everybody. What happened next was shocking. Despite being such a famous name, Dairy Queen started losing momentum in many areas. Younger customers did not always feel emotionally connected to the brand the way previous generations did. And in business, that is terrifying, because nostalgia only works if new generations create their own memories too. At the same time, some franchise owners became frustrated. Upgrading stores was expensive, competition was fierce, and profits were not always reliable. Some locations closed, others struggled to modernize, and slowly the cracks became visible. But then, something unexpected happened. In 1998, billionaire investor Warren Buffett, through his company Berkshire Hathaway, bought Dairy Queen. And this move completely changed the conversation around the brand. Now, if you know anything about Warren Buffett, you know he does not usually throw money at random businesses. He invests in companies with strong long-term potential, powerful branding, and loyal customers. So when Berkshire Hathaway acquired Dairy Queen, many people saw it as a vote of confidence. And honestly, it probably saved the company from drifting further into decline. Under Berkshire Hathaway ownership, Dairy Queen gained more stability, stronger financial backing, and a renewed focus on expansion. The company pushed harder into international markets, especially Asia and the Middle East. And surprisingly, Dairy Queen found huge success overseas. This part of the story is fascinating because while some American customers view Dairy Queen as an aging nostalgic brand, international customers often saw it as exciting and premium, especially in countries where American fast food culture carried a certain appeal. China in particular became incredibly important. New stores opened rapidly. Menus were adjusted for local tastes. And Dairy Queen discovered something important. Nostalgia may fade in one market, but a strong brand can reinvent itself somewhere else. Still, even with international success, challenges never fully disappeared. The rise of health consciousness created another obstacle. More consumers started paying attention to sugar, calories, and processed foods. Suddenly, giant sugary blizzards did not look quite as harmless as they once did. And this created a strange tension for Dairy Queen, because indulgence was literally part of its identity. How do you sell giant frozen desserts in an era where everybody talks about wellness and fitness? Some companies handled this shift better than others, but Dairy Queen often leaned into indulgence instead of fighting it. And honestly, there is something almost refreshing about that. While other brands tried to pretend unhealthy food was secretly healthy, Dairy Queen basically said, yes, this is dessert. Yes, it is rich. And yes, it is supposed to be fun. But even that strategy came with risks. Consumer habits kept changing. Food delivery apps transformed the restaurant business. Social media changed marketing forever. And younger audiences demanded constant innovation. Trends moved faster than ever before. One week, everybody wanted frozen yogurt. The next week, it was bubble tea, then protein smoothies, then gourmet cookies. Keeping up became exhausting for nearly every restaurant chain, and yet Dairy Queen somehow survived all of it. Why? Because the brand still understood emotion better than many competitors. This might sound dramatic, but people do not usually go to Dairy Queen because they are hungry in a practical sense. They go because they want comfort, nostalgia, celebration, or escape. Maybe it is after a bad day. Maybe it is after a soccer game. Maybe it is a late-night summer drive. Dairy Queen became deeply connected to emotional moments, and that kind of connection is incredibly powerful. Still, not every decision worked. Some menu experiments failed badly, certain locations struggled with quality control, and critics sometimes argued the brand lacked a clear identity compared to competitors. Even today, some people see Dairy Queen mainly as a dessert shop, while others treat it like a full fast food restaurant. That confusion still exists. And then came another massive challenge that shook the entire restaurant industry. The pandemic, when lockdowns hit, restaurants everywhere faced chaos. Dining rooms closed, supply chains broke down, customer habits changed overnight, and suddenly survival depended on adaptability. Some chains collapsed under the pressure, but Dairy Queen managed to stay surprisingly resilient. Part of that came from its drive-through focused business model. Customers could still grab ice cream or quick meals without leaving their cars. And during a stressful period filled with uncertainty, people often turned toward comfort food, which worked in Dairy Queen's favor. But even then, the company faced labor shortages, rising costs, and changing customer expectations. Because the post-pandemic world did not magically become easier for restaurants. In many ways, it became harder. Today, Dairy Queen exists in a strange but fascinating position. It is not the dominant cultural force it once was. But it is also far from irrelevant. It still has thousands of locations worldwide, millions of loyal customers, and one of the most recognizable dessert products in fast food history. The Blizzard remains iconic, and the company continues expanding internationally while updating stores in North America. Yet the big question still hangs over the brand. Can nostalgia alone carry a business forever? Because eventually every company faces the same challenge. Old memories are powerful, but new memories matter even more. And honestly, Dairy Queen's story feels bigger than just ice cream. It is really a story about American culture itself, about how businesses rise by understanding people emotionally, how success can create complacency, and how survival often depends on reinvention. There is also something strangely admirable about Dairy Queen's persistence, despite all the competition, despite changing trends, despite moments where the company looked outdated or lost. It never completely disappeared, and maybe that says something important about the brand. People still crave simple pleasures. In a world where everything feels complicated, expensive, and constantly changing, there is something comforting about pulling into a Dairy Queen parking lot on a hot evening and ordering the same Blizzard you loved years ago. Of course, not everybody sees the company positively. Critics point to unhealthy menus, inconsistent store quality, and the broader decline of traditional fast food culture. And those criticisms are fair. Some locations genuinely feel neglected, while others thrive. And depending on where you live, your Dairy Queen experience can feel completely different. But maybe that inconsistency is part of what makes the brand interesting. Unlike hyper-controlled corporate chains where every location feels identical, Dairy Queen still carries traces of local identity. Some stores feel frozen in time, others feel modern and polished. And that unpredictability gives the brand a strangely human quality. There is one more thing worth mentioning. The emotional power of childhood memory in business is almost impossible to measure. And Dairy Queen mastered that better than most companies. Because when adults bring their kids to Dairy Queen, they are often not just buying dessert. They are recreating memories from their own past. And that cycle is incredibly valuable. But cycles can break too. If younger generations stop forming emotional attachments to the brand, the nostalgia engine eventually runs out. And this is probably Dairy Queen's biggest challenge moving forward, not just selling food, but staying culturally relevant in an era where attention spans are shorter than ever. So what does the future look like? Honestly, it could go either way. On one hand, Dairy Queen still has brand recognition that most companies would kill for, global expansion opportunities, and a product lineup people genuinely love. On the other hand, the food industry is brutally competitive. Trends change constantly, and younger audiences are less loyal to brands than previous generations. One viral trend can create overnight success, but one bad reputation can spread just as fast. And maybe that is why Dairy Queen's story feels so compelling, because it never followed a perfectly smooth path. It rose rapidly, stumbled badly, reinvented itself multiple times, survived changing industries, and somehow remained part of popular culture through sheer resilience. Not many companies can say that. From a tiny experimental ice cream shop in Illinois to an international fast food giant owned by one of the richest investors in the world, Dairy Queen experienced triumphs most businesses never achieve, and struggles most businesses never survive. And maybe the craziest part is this. Even after everything, the company is still here, still serving cones, still flipping blizzards upside down, still creating summer memories for millions of people. That kind of survival does not happen by accident. So the next time you see a Dairy Queen on the side of the road, it might look like just another fast food restaurant. But behind that glowing sign is decades of ambition, risk, reinvention, and survival. A company that captured America's sweet tooth, nearly lost its place in the world, and fought to stay relevant through one of the most competitive industries on earth. And honestly, there is something strangely inspiring about that. Because Dairy Queen's story is not really about ice cream at all. It is about adaptation, nostalgia, and the constant battle between tradition and change. The real question is whether Dairy Queen can keep evolving without losing the charm that made people fall in love with it in the first place. What do you think? Is Dairy Queen still an iconic part of American culture? Or is it slowly becoming a relic of the past? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.